Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, depending on where you are in the United States, because I know we have participants that are from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. And my name is Jim Randall, and I'm privileged to be with you today and really serve as your host today. Dan has asked me to step in and to host today's webinar. Where Dan and Mike will be with us. And so just want to take a few moments and introduce you to myself and to Dan and to Mike if you do not know them already. As we open up today's webinar, just kind of remind you of a couple of things that we always do in webinars. It's just that reminder that you're on here to hopefully be open to some new thinking or new ideas. I lead a consulting organization that really helps churches achieve breakthrough clarity. And we always say we do not want to put God in a box. We want to be open to those new ideas and that new thinking. As best as you can today in the next hour or so that we'll be together, try to eliminate distractions and to stay focused. We do keep the webinar muted so that the background noises are minimized and things like that. And so please, we want to encourage you to just kind of make sure that you shut that office door, maybe have that ringer turned off for the next hour or so as you get the opportunity to learn from Dan and to learn some new tools and some new ideas from Mike. Just as a reminder, if you'd like, this is a recorded webinar. We will be using it for some replay. And if you would like to remain anonymous, then what we would encourage you to do is just go into your webinar there settings and turn off the video, your video. You'll still be able to see us, but you will not be a part of the actual video recording. No one would see your name or anything like that. It allows you to stay anonymous throughout this. And many of you have utilized the chat function in Zoom over the last year, and we want to welcome you and encourage you. We have that monitored by 2 to 3 of our team members that will be looking. And if you have some questions along the way, we really want to address as many of your questions as possible. And really kind of help answer those questions and help move you along in this process. So just a little bit of background information for you at this point. The main thing, though, as we get started, once again, Dan Dalton is with us today. Dan is senior partner and co-founder of Dalton and Tomich. Now, Dalton and Tomich they're based in Detroit. Dan, good to have you with us today. How's the weather in Detroit today?
Hey, Jim, it's great here. It's a beautiful Michigan summer day, 70s, the sun's out. Fantastic day. Good to see you.
That's great, Dan. It's when I was there with you just a few weeks ago, it was one of those beautiful days as well. And I'm calling in or zooming in from beautiful Florida, just outside of Orlando, about an hour or so on the East Coast. And once again, I serve as the co-founder and senior lead navigator for and CEO of Auxano Consulting. Now, Dan, you've got some extensive background as a litigator in land use with churches, helping local churches kind of seeking separation through the denomination. So this is not your first rodeo. This isn't your first time to be stepping into this, right?
That's correct, Jim. I've been at it for 20 years just on this topic. I worked with local churches leaving denominations. I've looked in the Episcopal world originally, then Presbyterian USA, and then now all across the country in Methodist cases. I've done quite a bit of this work.
Well, Dan, we're gonna be tapping into that expertise today. Okay, so I hope you're ready to kind of get the firestorm of questions from myself and from several of our participants today. Mike Gammill's joining us as well, and so Mike serves as the director of the Crossroads Survey, which is a survey for churches that really kind of want to know where their congregation stands. And Mike will be sharing a little bit more with us about that in a few moments. But Mike, you serve there as a director of the Crossroads Survey. You also serve as a senior lead navigator. So Mike, tell me just a little bit about, give us that little quick little understanding of what's the Crossroads Survey and what exactly do you do as a senior lead navigator?
Right. Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here, and it's good to be on the call with you, Dan, as well. As a senior lead navigator, I help facilitate visionary processes with churches to identify a church's visionary identity and to create a 5-7-year visionary plan on a page. As the Crossroads Survey, we discern there's a significant need within United Methodist congregations to get a snapshot, a look into their congregation's sentiment towards denominational affiliation, especially in regard to the approaching possible separation that may happen if the separation protocol passes. So the Crossroads Survey provides clarity for the leader into where their congregation's leaning, and so it's available for every United Methodist congregation to use.
Oh, that's great, Mike. It's that where do we stand with the Crossroads Survey, and then as a navigator, really helping a church understand who they are and where does God want them to go moving forward. So, Mike, man, it's great having you. Now you're coming to us from Bozeman, Montana.
Absolutely, and it's
very different from Detroit, Michigan, Dan, and Orlando, Florida, Jim.
Right. And it's so beautiful outside today that it feels like it's a crime to be inside. That's how beautiful it is here today. But tomorrow it could be snowing, so you just never know.
Fair enough. Well, Dan, I want to kind of come back to you here as we kind of get into the more formal aspect of really getting you to help us to understand some things, just big picture. And then also to really answer some of the questions that have been asked, that you're getting emails, you're getting phone calls, you get text messages. You've got some clients that you've already moved through the process and really help us to address this. So kind of give us a little bit of an overview here, Dan. What are we here to talk about? Everybody kind of knows it's something about the, UMC and the protocol of separation. Give us an idea of why is this important?
Well, there's just a general dysfunction right now in the United Methodist Church, in the denomination. There's, so many things happening right now where, local churches are wondering, what's the status of this denomination? What do we really believe? What are our bishops doing? Where do our apportionments go? There's a general fear of heavy-handedness of bishops. We've seen that in the Northern Georgia Conference, New Jersey, and the California Pacific Conference. We've seen just a lot of heavy-handedness, a lot of dysfunction, a lot of anxiety with the denomination and the conferences as a whole. And individually in local churches, it's a lot of members are leaving. They don't want to be a part of a denomination that's dysfunctional. It's hard to hire staff, retain staff, and find new staff in local churches as well because of the dysfunction. So a choice has to be made, and it has to be made now because the local churches are basically, people are falling away from them. Do we survive as a congregation of local church and do something now? Or do we wait for something which has been on an ongoing conversation for almost 50 years within the denomination? And we've helped about 50 churches leave the denomination. We're helping about 40 right now go through that process throughout the United States. And we're just working with local churches just to help stabilize and help them to become a separate local independent church.
Yeah, Dan, that's a lot. That is a lot. That's the issue happening right now. Absolutely. And once again, I mean, the issues that are facing the denomination, as you shared, even some of the leadership decisions, how it is affecting members leaving, staff retention, huge issues. Bottom line is leaders within the congregation, within their local church are looking for some assistance and they're facing some issues. Mike, you work elbow to elbow, side by side with congregational leaders, church pastors, and ministry leaders. What are you seeing? What are you seeing that they're facing? What are you seeing some of the things that they're dealing with here?
Yeah, so absolutely. So, the local pastor and the local United Methodist leader at their heart, they got into ministry, their pastors, their churches, because they want to extend the mission of Christ to their congregation, to their community. And that's where they want to focus their time and their energy. They want to know who they are and where they're headed. Instead, we're dealing with COVID. And before COVID, we're dealing with all this denominational dysfunction. And I won't retread any of the ground that Dan so perfectly summarized. All that's there. And so pastors are having to deal with this dysfunctional denomination. And they want to be part of a system, if they're a part of one, that adds value to them. And so as they try to lead through this, one of the core issues is getting really a strong idea of where their congregation stands. Because every leader, they want to focus on what Jesus called them to do. And so as a result, they haven't really talked a lot about the denominational issues with their congregation. Often the local pastor and the leaders just don't know how connected the local congregation is to the United Methodist Church. They worried, if we were to disaffiliate, would we lose 10, 20, 30, 40% of our congregation? Would giving go down? You can imagine all those specific, fears that surround that. And so this is exactly why we created the Crossroads Survey, was to give pastors a way to get an anonymous, snapshot into their congregation to really know where people stand. That survey, we've tested the questions with churches across the spectrum theologically, so that wherever you stand on the issues of the denomination, your congregation can take it in a way the survey doesn't lead them. They just answer the questions, and the leader can look and know how strongly people feel connected to their denomination. They can know, hey, if we do disaffiliate, will I still have a congregation tomorrow? Or if I don't disaffiliate, will I still have a congregation tomorrow? Both of those things can be true, and we're seeing that in the results. So the leadership is facing really a kind of a data problem, really knowing where their people stand, where they want to be led. And so the Crossroads Survey helps to solve that problem.
Mike, thank you for pulling that together for us. And really, as I listen to both you and Dan, I really am hearing two spectrums here, that there are leadership implications and there are legal implications. And thank you guys for really kind of saying, hey, we want to be a help and an aid to churches to be able to move them through both of those. Dan, legal implications, they're real. I mean, it's a real thing, right? And that's why you've been here. You've shared that there's been somewhere around 50 churches that you've already helped successfully navigate through. There's another 40 or so that are in active status right now. Why don't you take just a moment real quick and really maybe help us to understand some of those legal implications, Dan, maybe financial, some things, related to what it would mean related to property and some things like that. Because at the bottom line, for a lot of us, that's our great concern. Let's just be honest. That's some of our concern. What's the loss, or what's the problem, the challenges that we'll face in any type of separation?
Right. So the legal implications is it's state specific. So state law and each state court is going to have their own rules and their own guidance on this particular issue. Because as you know, that the United Methodist Church has the Hotel California rule. You can join, but you can't leave. There is the Taylor disaffiliation plan that was passed in 2019, but quite frankly, after it passed, the bishops just refused to endorse it or allow it. And only last month, several conferences would say, okay, we'll approve it. But the plan is just really cost prohibitive because it's apportionments plus a number that they determine to be an unfunded pension liability, plus any additional costs that the conference might want to add in. And they just put a number out there that's so huge that it's the idea for the conference is really to disincentivize local churches to leave by saying, this is a number you'll never be able to pay, and so if you want out, you'll have to pay it. But if you don't, you have to stick with us.
Yeah.
The legal issues that we look at it's a blend of state corporate law, of trust law, of property law, along with the First Amendment Establishment Clause issues that kind of go into it. So it's looking at how you're governed and what you own, and that's really the basis of what we do. Articles of incorporation, bylaws, deeds, endowments, trust, all of that is specific to your local church, and we look at that to see, what is it that you have, and how are you governed, and what do you own, so then we can take the next step forward to create a path out under state law. If you look, when these cases first started with the Episcopal churches, a lot of the churches just notified their diocese and said, we want out. And the diocese said, that's fine. We own all your property and all your real estate, your real and personal property. Because the local churches didn't take any steps to fix their articles of incorporation, their bylaws, and their deeds. Learning from that, we now know those are really the things we got to do at the outset. We got to take that evaluation at the outset, move forward. So that's the legal side. The financial side is that at the end of the day, there's going to be some payment from the local church to the conference to get out. So it's the way we look at it is the cost of litigation. What will it cost you to litigate this matter to your court, your local, through your court system and appellate system as well, versus the cost of leaving? And if the number of the cost of leaving is significantly higher, then it's an easy call of we litigate those cases. If it's somewhere in that a number we can tolerate, then it's a number that we negotiate out. But at the end of the day, it's the financial implications are present, but the legal issues are, how are we governed and what do we own?
Yes. And those are at the forefront of kind of the crossroads we're at in making that decision. Dan, you mentioned several steps in the process. In just a moment, I've got a follow-up question for Mike first, but in just a moment, Dan, would you kind of maybe just unpack or just kind of share with us what the steps might be in the process if we were to reach out to you, engage DNT as a part of helping with this litigation? Will you kind of walk us through the process that you guys lead churches through and lead ministry leaders through? And Dan, before I do that, Mike, I really am kind of intrigued. I know that as you guys, same as Dan have helped churches through the process of separation, the legal process of separation. Mike, you guys have seen some churches that have done the Crossroads Survey, that have used it to really be able to glean and get some insight into their congregation. What are you learning? What are you kind of seeing? What do you kind of see? What's kind of popping up? And kind of give us a little bit of an idea from that aspect. What have you learned from that?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're looking for from the Crossroads Survey is to get a sense of not certainty, but a kind of like a strong leadership pull. Like, we know we can lead our congregation in a direction and that our core congregation will follow. What we're learning is that even in the highest, there are no congregations where everyone's 100% on board. That's not out there. But we are seeing congregations where you think of almost a mandate where 80% wants to do X. And that could look like they want to stay affiliated, or they want to disaffiliate, or that can look like different things. But what that congregation is telling their leaders is, if you don't leave or stay, we're going to leave. And so this tells the leader he needs to take action and needs to take it soon. And then there's another big chunk of churches where they have a majority, say 50 or 60%, that want to say disaffiliate, but they also have a 30 to 40% that really like things the way they are. And what that tells pastors is they're probably going to need to move in the direction of the big majority, but they've got a lot of education to do. They have a lot of peacemaking to do. They have a lot of shepherding to do for people who don't agree. And so the survey gives them those talking points. And then there is the category of what I call the mixed minority, just where you've just got this flotsam and jetsam of unity that's been brought together by a commitment to denomination, but not a commitment to any grounding theology. And so what they have is you've got 30% here, 30% there. And what that tells us is they don't have the will to change. That church is going to go along with the rule of their conference and the denomination. And that pastor has the certainty of that. And so he can shepherd his people in that direction. So what the protocol or what the survey will reveal is provide some certainty for the pastor and the leadership about the direction they can go with the people that God has brought together in their local congregation.
Well, Mike, the word that comes to me is it will help provide that leader with confidence. Absolutely. That they at least know where their congregation stands and they can begin to really kind of think about their steps moving forward. So steps moving forward, Dan, what are some of those high level? And I'm sure there's a lot of detail here, but Dan, if you can just share with us maybe at a high level here of what those steps in the process, what might it look like if we were to pursue this and your team were to help walk us through that?
Well, the number one thing is having a strong leadership team, like what Mike mentioned. It's so critical to have a group of people. It doesn't need to be a lot, and really the pastor should be involved from the standpoint of knowing what's going on, but it really needs to know that the leaders have their back and the leaders can make decisions. But we need somebody to work with in the church that's going to make decisions. We're very famous in the United Methodist Church. I was a part of it for about 20 years. We have great potlucks, we have lots of committees, and we don't make decisions. That's one of those things that's just a tradition of the Methodist Church. But we need decisions, and we need leaders to carry through and take those steps. And we can certainly, we do the work, but the leaders need to make decisions. We can't really make those decisions for you. From a high level, what we need is documents. After we're retained, we'll send a list of documents from you. A lot of these things were created years ago that it's going to take some time to get together, and you might have them or you might not have them. But we need to have a baseline understanding of what you owned and how you're governed. And we also need to know what you've told the conference, what you own and how you're governed. So we looked at charge conference reports as well, just to get a big picture of that. Then we provide a game plan forward of evaluating what you have, how you're governed, how things are titled. And this will do an action plan, basically. And it's going to be one of three things. You could be perfectly fine the way you are, or documents need to be amended, which is likely, or you might not have anything. So we need to create documents or entities to protect your property and preserve your ministry. And then once all those are created, then we go ahead and we enter into negotiations with the conference. And the reason we do that is because if we went right to litigation, we'd spend a lot of money and a lot of time in litigation at the outset. And then 2 years later or a year later, we would be before the court would say, go to mediation and see if you can resolve this. So we try to negotiate up front. If we can't negotiate a number, then we go to mediation. We hire a retired judge or an attorney we respect. We try to mediate, try to come to terms. And more often than not, probably about 98, 99% of the time, things get resolved at that point in time.
Okay.
Just when parties just kind of just can't get there, that's when we either make a determination that you got to litigate or just kind of, let things sit and try again at a later date.
So Dan, to be clear on that, what you're saying is in an overwhelming majority of the case, as high as 98, 99% or a high percentage, the resolution it's usually resolved at the negotiation with the conference step. That the majority of the time so far, that's when it's had the closure.
Right. So it's not using any separation plan. It's not using the Taylor plan. It's just negotiating a number. What we're finding with the conferences is that there's no real rule of thumb to what the number is. It's just a negotiated number.
Okay. Dan, that's helping us a lot to kind of know what we may be facing. I have one follow-up question back to the documents, because it sounds like the documents really kind of determine the position we're in. How much should we worry, or how much should we fret if we don't have the documents in the perfect place, either by we can't find them, or they're not necessarily stated in the way that they should be stated? How big of an issue is that for us? Is that something that within months that you can help guide a church to get to where they need to be?
Yeah, usually actually within weeks.
Beautiful.
The most important documents are your articles of incorporation or your deeds, and those are typically publicly filed. Your articles are with the Secretary of State's office. Your deeds are with the county land division or records bureau or register of deeds.
Right.
So we can get those documents if you don't have them. The other documents would be great to have, but it's not as critical as those other ones. But we do, but it's just so critical, Jim, to get the documents right. I mean, there was a case in Arizona about a year ago where a church had a piece of property and they didn't do any of the work up front that they needed to do, and they lost their case. And the reason they lost their case is their articles of incorporation tie them to the discipline. Under Arizona law, they could easily have amended those articles prior to filing for disaffiliation. And it was just a 1 hour kind of thing to do, and they would have saved their property, but they didn't do it. They just kind of on their own decided what to do, and they didn't consult legal counsel.
Right.
And that's what happened there. So it's really critical.
Yeah, the value of a strategic legal outsider in this case that understands it, gets it, can make a world of difference. And so I being in those shoes many times, I couldn't recommend it any higher. Dan, you and Mike are both on here, and Mike has talked a little bit about the Crossroads Survey and kind of give us a little bit of an idea. Tell us where you would recommend a church do the Crossroads Survey. Is that a before? Is that a in the midst of? Is that it's certainly after? Seems like it would be too late, right? So can you give us a little bit of an idea of where maybe in that process you might recommend, in your process, you might recommend for them to take the Crossroads Survey to have a strong awareness?
Sure. It's pretty much upfront. Typically what I do is a leadership team or someone will contact me. I'll talk to the leadership team, and the first step is I always tell them, make sure the leaders are on board. You don't really want to have a war, internal war, to start with.
Right.
The second step is talk to your pastor, see where your pastor's at. And you don't have to say, hey, we're leaving. You just say, pastor, where you're at. And if you're on the same theological team, then you'll be set. The third thing is that the third step is that's when you would do your survey. That's when I always recommend, find out where the congregation's at. Leadership might be one place and congregation might be other. I mean, we see that in the denomination that for a large part, the clergy is in one place. The bishops are in a completely different other place. So find out where your team is at. And it's usually, like in any church, it's 20% of the people do 80% of the work.
Sure.
Those 20% of the people are at. They're the ones that are going to show up for your meetings and be vocal and things like that.
Wow, that's great. Thank you, Dan. I want to recap for everyone, and maybe Steve can put this in the chat box. But I really kind of wrote down, Dan, kind of 4 really big ideas on these steps for you that you're recommending at, once again, that higher level is, number 1, to build a strong leadership team. Make sure you're on the same theological, on the same leadership page, right? So build that strong leadership page. Compile your documents. Pull those documents together. So we're going to build that team. We're going to compile the documents. Your team is going to help and pick up at that point. As there's a strong leadership team put together, you're going to help them know what documents to compile. And then you're going to help them develop an action plan. You're doing that. You're developing that action plan. And then the last one is you're negotiating with the conference. And that developing the action plan may be something related to what you got to do to tighten up the documents, and it's also going to involve what those next steps are. So I kind of jotted down building that leadership team, compiling those documents, developing an action plan, and then the negotiation with the conference. And in the big scope of things, that's the primary thing. You're helping, you're holding their hand all the way through this process as it relates to a partnership with D&T. So Dan, thanks. That's helping giving me clarity. I'm one of those guys, you can tell guys, I'm one of those guys, you got to give it to me and like, tell me what you want me to do, right? What are those steps? And so thanks for that, Dan. We're going to come back to you again with a couple more questions here in just a moment. Mike, same question for you. If a church is, kind of continuing to consider this, and they're going to take Dan's advice, and they're putting together a team, and they're trying to find out, is everybody on the same page? Can you give us a little bit of an idea? What are the steps in the process to execute a survey like this? And I'm just going to ask you, Mike, is this a public, is this like an anonymous survey? Do they have to give their name and their, all that kind of stuff? Talk to me a little bit about that real quick.
Yeah. So, as far as the steps, let me answer that first. I would boil it down as simple as possible to an answer that will make absolute sense to us. It's going to sound a little bit like I'm just like giving the Bible answer, the Sunday school answer. But I would say to all of our leaders, we need to pray through our circles of disclosure. Now, circles of disclosure may sound like a complicated term, but it's really not. It's, hey, get your core leadership team together, have a prayerful season of discernment with them about this issue, and then go to your next circle of disclosure, your larger staff, and then go to your all of your volunteers, and then go to your whole congregation. So it's just start the conversation small in a prayerful season of discernment. That can be a month, 30 days, 45 days. And I interviewed a really high profile, formerly Methodist church a few weeks ago, and this is exactly what they did. The pastor started a 30 days of prayer, just the pastor team. And then they took it to their larger staff. And then they took it to their volunteers. And they just prayed through the decision together. And so it's sort of prayerful conversation with the people who are affected by the decision, and just cascade out the conversations. As far as the Crossroads Survey, it is a templated survey that we've created. You can go onto the crossroadssurvey.com, and you can see that this is something you can sign up for. We have a communication plan to help you communicate to your congregation what's going to be on the survey, what we're testing for, the kinds of things we're going to want to be able to answer. And it shows you how to promote it, to collect responses, to get maximum participation from your congregation. And it's at a really accessible price point. We've based it on the number of users. So, literally, if you've got a church of 100, you're going to pay less than a church of 1,000. And so we've made it really accessible for every church to just plug and play into their context. It's a part of having that prayerful season of conversation, but also then getting back those responses, so you know where your people stand in regard to denominational affiliation.
Mike, go ahead and tell us a little bit. Because I know that we'll get there. What's the low to high on that price point then for the survey? What's kind of the entry, the lower, the churches under 100 to the churches that are larger in size? Right.
And so it's under 100 is $149. And then
is that $149
for the implementation of the survey?
For the entire church?
For the entire church. And so that gets you 100 people coming in and filling out the survey, and then you as the leader get those results back. And it's important. Like, this is fully anonymous. Nowhere do you collect names. We don't even collect gender, but we do collect some data like age brackets, involvement in the church, their connection to the church if they're a member. So you can do some kind of easy cross tabs to know kind of how, what are our members thinking? What are our 60 plus thinking? What are our millennials thinking? You can kind of do some of that in that survey. If you have a larger church, say a church of 750, the cost is $450 again for the whole church. And so this is a one-time fee. You sign up for it, you implement it, and you get the results. And then and this is not seen by anyone outside. So, we're friendly to denomination, but we wouldn't necessarily want them to know your results. That's for you to share with your leaders. And if you wanted to share with other officials, you certainly could, but they're yours to safeguard.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Mike. And you've already pointed everyone to the crossroadssurvey.com, and I know that'll pop up on the screen here in a few minutes. But you basically said, hey, listen, 2 steps, Jim. Have prayerful conversations and administer the survey. And that's a pretty simple. You go to the .com to get there, and you guys have done a phenomenal job at really resourcing a ministry leader, a pastor, to know how to execute it, know how to execute it well. Just a plethora of resources there to help you to execute through that. So that is absolutely amazing. Well, Dan, I want to kind of come back to you a little bit. You've shared a little bit. You've shared about your process as a whole. You've talked a little bit about how you might even how you recommend the Crossroads Survey for leaders to understand where they are. Talk to us a little bit. This is a question that has popped up from one of the team members, from one of the participants today, Dan. They really kind of asked this question. I think it's a fair question, Dan. Why is this important now? I mean, why? And I'm going to say June of 2021. Why is this important now? It's kind of been, it's been a conversation for quite some time. There's been a lot of decisions made, unmade over the last several months, the last year or two. We've got some uncertainty moving forward. Why is it important now? What's maybe at stake with my church? Help me understand, and help us to all understand, why should we have maybe a spirit of, should we have a spirit of urgency? Should we have a spirit of wait and see?
Yeah, it should be urgency. Okay. Let me kind of break that down for you. Kind of starting from the back part is every church that has gone through this has told me, boy, I wish I would have done this sooner. Every single one. When they leave, they grow. Most people, when they leave a church, they don't come back. But when they leave, when the Methodist Church comes, you leave that denomination, people will come back. There's a new there's a new spirit within the church. There's an excitement in the local church. It's really interesting to see how churches grow after they leave the denomination. The big thing is why now is the churches that are leaving now are setting the bottom line. When you negotiate with the conference, you're the first ones having this discussion with them typically, and you're going to be setting the line in terms of what they're looking at to let other churches out. So you're going to be at the lower end of negotiations. You're also, why leaving now is important is because people are leaving the denomination post-COVID. It's about, what clients are telling us is about 75% of their congregation is back, which means 25% is left. You have a lot of visitors in a lot of churches, and those are people that are looking as well. So they're looking for a home. Staff is looking for certainty. Staff is looking out there and saying, boy, I don't know where this church is going to end up and where this denomination is going to be, and how do we plan for the future if we don't know where we're going to go as well. And there's a big question out there is should we just wait for this separation protocol to pass? And I'll be the first to tell you, and I've said this before, is I really do hope it passes. I really do. It was negotiated a year ago, January, by 5 affinity groups to basically have an amicable separation. But because of COVID and the General Conference was delayed in 2020 and in 2021, they say it's scheduled in 2022, but I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, I have conference trustees who are calling me and saying, I can't tell you who I am, but I can tell you that publicly we're supposed to say it's going to have a general conference, but privately, the bishops want to play the long game. They want to see churches go away. They want to see the problem childs lead. So when general conference occurs, the votes aren't going to be there to pass the separation protocol. The institutionalists don't want the separation protocol to pass because that's a loss of their jobs, and it's a loss of their prestige and a loss of their denomination. And they don't want to see that to happen because they know in a lot of Methodist churches that local churches won't do anything. They'll just kind of sit and wait. And that's with a lack of leadership. They see that all throughout the country. If you look at 2022, there's financially, we're being told that they don't have the funds to pay for a general conference in 2022, not less one in 2024 when they're supposed to have the next one. And you can even see today, if you go on the Minneapolis Convention Center today on June 17th, 2021, you'll see a whole bunch of things scheduled for 2022 at that convention center. But one thing you will not see is the United Methodist Church General Conference. They haven't scheduled it. It's just not going to happen. And waiting for it to happen, I think, is in 2022 is probably, is unfortunate. It's not going to happen in 2024. I don't think the votes are going to be there. And even if it does pass, the Judicial Council has already kind of shot a arrow across the bow on the constitutionality by saying, hey, we don't really think this thing is viable. I mean, the Constitution says you have to keep the Methodist Church together. You can't really have a proposal to separate it, because that would violate the Constitution. And I think they're right, quite frankly. So even if this does pass, the Judicial Council, I think, is going to invalidate the future. Now, this is just me speaking my opinions, not endorsed by anybody else. But I'm talking to conference trustees, I'm talking to chancellors, I'm talking to clients all throughout the United States. And there's the general feeling of this separation protocol is just not going to pass. So if you're waiting for that, you're just going to keep waiting, and you're going to find yourself in a hole in 2024 or 25 where your congregation is going to go, now what? So now's the time to go. Now is the time to go.
Yeah. So Dan, I assume that the question that came from one of the participants is there a way around the separation protocol? That answer is at this point, because there's not the formality of it passing, the answer is no at this point. And the conversation we're having now is the way around.
Yeah, the way out is through the process we talked about, through working through state law. And that's how we've taken about about 50 churches out, and how we're taking about 40 more through the process. And this isn't something that every lawyer does too. It's not a situation where it's not like divorce or bankruptcy or criminal law where, it's just a pro forma kind of thing. It's a real specialized niche, and you really need to work with counsel that has done this and knows this to help you through that process.
I think this is a good place for me to kind of jump in and just kind of speak a little bit about the role of a lawyer, because as a non-lawyer, I was a pastor before, I was a consultant with Auxano. We kind of read the Bible and we get this feeling in Corinthians that we're not supposed to use the legal system. We're supposed to work our conflict out with our brothers amicably. It's what Paul tells us. And I put this question to another church that I talked to a couple of weeks ago, again, large, former Methodist, United Methodist Church. And I said, hey guys, tell me about the role of a lawyer here. And when they realized they wanted to separate, they contacted the bishop, and they said it became pretty not friendly pretty fast. And it started to get really hard because of the relationships, their personal. And so they brought in a lawyer from their church. It wasn't Dan, it was somebody else, but they said it immediately changed the tone in a really good way, that the lawyer just helped them kind of take the relationships out of it, help them just start talking about the core issues that were involved. And it just helped them navigate the whole situation. They said, because this is what lawyers do. And it really spoke to me of the need to have someone like Dan come in and help us walk through this journey, because this isn't what we do. And they found that they were more biblical in their relationships, more biblical in their attitude, and eventually reached an agreement that was satisfactory to everybody, but they had to bring in someone from the outside to help them do it.
Yeah, that makes total sense, Mike. And it really sounds like incredibly wise counsel. So thank you so much for sharing that. Dan, I'm getting a couple of very practical questions. So I'm going to get really practical, okay? One of these questions is, and they're both kind of on a financial aspect of it, okay? And so one of the questions is really how much, like, depending on what happens in mitigation, how much does it cost for a congregation financially to leave. So number one, what are the financial, what are the, can you give us some type of a little more of an understanding of those financial implications? So that's a part one question. And then really the second one is really tied to the financial commitment with Dalton and Tomich. Is it, can you give us a little bit of an idea of how that would be figured out? Right. And when that is figured out in the process? Since you may actually want to meet with each church one-on-one to determine that, but can you give them a little bit of an idea on that financial implications?
Right. So the cost of leaving, like an exit fee or leaving the denomination, it's really there. Like I said earlier, there's no real rule of thumb. It's all a negotiated amount. I mean, we've helped. In most of them are subject to a confidentiality clause, so I can't talk about a lot of them, but I can talk about a couple that aren't. Give you an example. We helped a Northside church in Jackson, Tennessee. It was the largest church in the Memphis conference out. In theirs, in that conference, the demand was multiple millions of dollars from the conference to leave. And we settled it for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there was a substantial reduction there. We helped Glide Memorial in San Francisco. They had, I think, just a tremendous amount of assets, close to $100 million in assets. Wow. They paid 1.5 to get out. They also gave up a 2 trust where the principal was about $3 million, but those are trusts they couldn't use, and they couldn't use the proceeds either. So, I mean, but the actual check they cut was $1.5 million. There's other churches that are smaller churches. We've helped get out for as low as $25,000. Every church, it just depends on the church, depends on their assets, depends on their debt, depends on the fair market value of their building. It's just a negotiated number that comes down, and they're going to start, just like in any other negotiation, they're going to start with a super high number to kind of demoralize the church and to disincentivize them to leave. But they have no expectation that we're going to pay that number. And I think they're shocked when they do get that paid. Like in Grange, in Indiana, they did it without counsel. They just took the number and didn't negotiate. In other churches, when you kind of push them and prod them, you can get a number down substantially. And it's just, a lot of it depends on the conference and how financially desperate they are, and how much they want to get done with this whole thing, and how much they want to avoid litigation as well. Yeah. So I don't really have an answer for you. I know, like in the Presbyterian world, it was anywhere between 10 and 30% of the fair market value of your personal and real property. And depending on if you were in a jurisdiction that was friendly to local churches, it was close to 10. If it was not friendly to local churches, it was close to 30. So, we did that.
And Dan, I'm not hearing those percentages even on the high side. The low side of that sounds like the high side so far. Yeah. So we'll, once again, we have to respect the fact that that's not something that you really know till you're actually in the litigation. But really, that rule of thumb and those examples, Dan, help immensely. The second part of that question is really kind of when then during the steps or process would we start incurring costs with D&T, and really just kind of giving us an idea of, can that be, can we use church funds to pay for those fees? Sure. Just a couple of real technical things, once again, will help us just have an idea of what we're talking about or looking at.
Yeah, so under the Book of Discipline, you can hire professional services. You can hire accountants, lawyers, hire lawn services, and contractors. I mean, so you don't need any approval from your district superintendent or whatnot. You can enter into negotiations, and you can pay for legal services using general funds from your church. In terms of the cost, you can kind of think it from 3 phases. The first phase of kind of looking at what is it that you own, how are you governed, and giving a game plan forward, typically on average is between $3,000 and $10,000. Now there's a big swing there because sometimes churches just have a deed, so there's not a lot to analyze. Sure. Other times there's churches that have hundreds of thousands of pages of documents I got to review. lots of
Right.
entities and interrelated
Right.
parties and things like that. So it's usually on average, it could be more, it could be less. That's where that is. Their second phase is actually doing the work, which is, either creating entities or amending things. That typically is $10,000 to $15,000. And again, it could be more or less. Generally, it doesn't take us that much time to put the documents together. But where the time comes and the expense comes is going back and forth, making sure that we get the governing right, that you're comfortable with everything as a local church, and going from there. And then the third phase is negotiating with the conference. And that's numbers. There's really not a range I can predict. I used to have a number, but right now it's very difficult to say, because some conferences you can get to number right away. Other conferences, it just takes a lot of negotiation going back and forth. And sometimes you have to mediate the disputes as well, and that adds to it as well. But generally speaking, those are the numbers. The first two steps that I talked about, you're going to have to do anyways, whether you leave or if you just want to explore leaving, or if the Methodist Church actually implodes somewhere down the line. You're going to want to know what you have, how you own, how you govern, and you're going to want to get your governing documents together. You might as well get them done right, the first step. So you can really count on that as a minimum.
Dan, that has been immensely helpful. Do we make payments on those as the phases are completed?
It's just like any other legal service. There's an engagement fee up front that's applied to your final bill, and then you make payments every month. So at the end of the month, we send out or the beginning of the month, I should say, we send out a statement, and you make payments, and then at the final bill, we just apply the retainer, and it's going to be either a credit on that final bill, or it's going to be a refund back to you if there's not a lot of work, billed that month.
And Dan, really what you would probably say is the way to get more precise is to reach out to the firm, have a conversation, and really understand how that particular church, because we've got questions here from churches that maybe are under 50 and wanting to know if there's any chance that they're going to even be able to walk away with their property. Right. And you would say to them real quick,
I would say, look, for the smaller churches is, have a heart-to-heart with your conversation is how tied are you to your property? If your property value is limited, if you got an old building that needs a lot of work, it needs a lot of repair to it, it may be in your best interest to walk away. It might be cheaper for you just to start a new church, another congregation, a new entity, rent a hotel room or a school or a library on Sunday mornings, and then raise funds that way. And it just might be in your best interest to do it if you're smaller and not as financially, able to, do as larger churches. Just get a big picture, in terms of what you want. And I understand the emotional tug that you might have to property, but you also have to look at the economics of things as well. And the Episcopal world, for example, I had a church, a big cathedral in Florida, in northern Florida. 25 people worship there. It took multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars per year to operate that, and they needed multiple millions to update it. And they had a big endowment that could basically pay it. And if they used that endowment, it would empty the endowment out. But it was much cheaper. And we talked about it. It was like, let's just walk away from the property, give the diocese a big empty building, which they eventually sold, and start somewhere else.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. That's great counsel. And once again, I let me just say this: in the time I've gotten to know you and your firm, I have seen a genuine desire to serve the church, and I know that it's at your heart to serve and represent the body of Christ. And so I know you guys' hearts are where they need to be, and the motivation is right. And I would just say to any of the ministry leaders that are here inquiring is you don't know until you take the step forward to reach out and have the conversations, right? And initiating those conversations are going to be the best way for you to seek the more specific counsel, but you have really helped. We're coming up on an hour, and we had said that we were going to kind of try to draw it to a close about that time. And so both Mike and Dan, I'd like to just kind of maybe just give you each of you the opportunity and to just kind of give us some kind of closing thoughts for today? Just a word of advice, or just next step, and I'll close us out shortly after that. So Dan, why don't you give us a thought or two? What would, once again, it may be even answering a question that hasn't been asked yet. That's a possibility, right? Something that you go, I get asked this question all the time, and before we close out, I want to make sure that question gets addressed.
Right. And that question is how do we make sure that we're successful? And the answer is having good leaders. You got to have a strong leadership team, and everybody's got to be on the same page, and knowing where your congregation's at as well. Is you just can't have two battles going on at once. You can't have an internal battle. You can't have a battle with your lender, or you can't have battles with anybody else. You just, get everybody on the same page, have a good leadership team, find out where your church is at, your congregation is at, and that's really going to help drive success to become an independent church and preserve your property, protect your ministry.
Wow, thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. That's exactly right. And that adage of axiom in leadership is that everything rises and falls on leadership, right? And we certainly don't need to be divided, and we certainly need to be one in spirit as we move forward with whatever the church is deciding to do. Mike, why don't you share with us a thought too?
Yeah, I'll just build on what Dan shared, that as leaders, we want to be able to focus on the mission that Jesus has given us, and that call that he's uniquely called your church to accomplish within the Great Commission. And so the whole conversation here is whether or not the denomination is helping us with that, or whether they're not. And so as leaders, we want to be as clear as we can be on your visionary identity. How has God called us uniquely to fulfill the Great Commission? And then where has he called us to go? And the more clearly you define those and answer those questions, the more obvious it will be whether or not you should stay aligned with the denomination. As it kind of shifts and changes and does its thing, we'll know like, hey, we're headed in the same direction, or we're not headed in compatible directions. And if that's the case, then it makes that answering the question of affiliation much, much easier, because we know if we're not headed in the same direction, then we need to part ways.
And once again, great words there, Mike. Great reminders for us. We did not get to all of the questions that are in the chat box, but we will do our best to follow up with you and to make sure that we've tapped into some of those as we can. Steve, why don't you go ahead and let's put that closing slide. If you're interested, if you've not already taken a next step with Dan, but if you're interested in taking a next step and talking with Dan or a member of his team, you see Dan Dalton, you see the number there, 313-859-6000, or you can email Dan at ddalton@daltonandtomich.com and get some more information and really kind of begin that conversation to address some of your individual questions that may not have been addressed today, or maybe they're very, very specific and would be very hard to address in this environment. If you are interested in learning more about the Crossroads Survey, we want to encourage you to go to crossroadssurvey.com. You'll go to that website. You can hang out at that website for a good 20, 30 minutes. Easy, and probably get the majority of your questions answered. But if you still have a lingering question or two, feel free to email us at crossroads@auxano.com. That's crossroads@auxano.com. And Mike or someone from his team will get back with you and answer that specific question and help you along in that process. So, Steve, I want to thank you for kind of being on the back end of facilitating and organizing the webinar for us and really managing it. He's behind the screen of all this. So thank you for that. But very, very, very much so, Mike and Dan, wow, what an hour, what a plethora of information that has helped us. Once again, participants, this has been recorded. You will receive an email for playback. If you felt like you missed something, you wanted to hear something again, you'll get that email with the playback for you to be able to do it. And of course, on the screen is the ability for you to reach out individually from there. So thank you, participants. God bless you in your ministry and your call, and may God give you a great and strong sense of discernment as you move forward and leading and guiding your church. So once again, team, thank you so much for being with us. God bless everyone.